The reported Ukrainian strike in Pokrovsk represents more than a tactical maneuver. It is a decisive signal in a conflict that has long oscillated between attrition and headline-driven narratives. The attack, reportedly successful in disabling Russian logistical nodes and command infrastructure, lays bare a striking asymmetry in operational execution. Ukraine, constrained by geography and resources, demonstrates a capacity for precision and strategic foresight that Russia, despite numerical superiority, repeatedly fails to match. These are not mere battlefield events. They are indicators of structural weaknesses in Russian command protocols, highlighting systemic failures that ripple beyond the immediate theater of war. We must assess the significance of this strike in legal and geopolitical terms. Military action, even under the shadow of a protracted war, is bound by the conventions of international law. Ukraine's targeting, as reported, adheres to established principles of distinction and proportionality, giving it a legitimacy in the eyes of the global legal community. Conversely, Russia's apparent inability to protect key infrastructure, amid claims of indiscriminate bombardments elsewhere, reflects both operational incompetence and disregard for internationally recognized norms. In practical terms, the strike exposes the disparity between formal authority and actual control, a dichotomy that has characterized the Russian approach throughout the conflict. Equally important is the psychological dimension. Military defeats of this magnitude have effects that extend beyond maps and casualty figures. They erode morale, strain the cohesion of command structures, and force adversaries into reactive postures. Ukraine's precision, in contrast, reinforces the perception of initiative and competence. This perception, though intangible, informs international support, influencing everything from military aid allocations to diplomatic engagement. Finally, the attack underscores a persistent tension between law and chaos. While Ukraine operates under clear legal and operational frameworks, Russia's losses illustrate the consequences of centralized power without accountability. This is not a matter of optics. It is a systemic failure that threatens Russia's strategic objectives. The strike in Pokrovsk is a microcosm of a broader struggle, the contest between disciplined statecraft and ad hoc power projection. Observers and policymakers alike must recognize that battlefield events, when considered in isolation, tell only half the story. The full narrative emerges when we examine the legal, operational, and strategic dimensions together, a triad that Ukraine currently navigates with far greater competence than its adversary. Beyond the immediate military calculus, the strike in Pokrovsk reverberates through economic corridors, exposing vulnerabilities that few in Western capitals fully appreciate. Warfare is no longer confined to terrain and ordnance. It is equally fought through supply chains, trade flows, and financial instruments. Russia's apparent losses in logistics and command infrastructure are not merely tactical setbacks. They undermine its capacity to sustain energy exports, weapon production, and essential imports. Each disrupted node is a lever pulled on an already fragile economic apparatus, amplifying the pressure of international sanctions and internal inefficiency. Consider the implications for trade and energy markets. The Ukrainian strike, by degrading transport and storage systems, threatens the stability of Russian commodity flows. Europe and Asia, both reliant on Russian energy and raw materials, may face immediate disruptions that ripple through pricing, investment decisions, and long-term strategic planning. Yet this is not a simple narrative of supply shock. It is a lesson in leverage. Those who control the means of production, movement, and distribution ultimately dictate political options. Ukraine, by targeting strategic nodes rather than indiscriminately striking territory, exercises economic coercion with precision, a rare but decisive tool in modern warfare. Russia, in contrast, exposes the hazards of centralized decision-making divorced from operational reality. Political chaos translates directly into economic vulnerability. Mismanagement in logistics, coupled with bureaucratic opacity, weakens Russia's bargaining position internationally. Allies and neutral states perceive instability, markets price in uncertainty. Leadership, once considered monolithic, is revealed as brittle. The consequences are not hypothetical. They manifest as inflation, declining investment, and reduced global influence. This intersection of military action and economic leverage illuminates a broader principle. Strategic victory is inseparable from the capacity to sustain it financially. Wars are expensive, but poorly managed states compound the cost by eroding confidence in governance and contract enforcement. Ukraine's operational successes, therefore, carry an outsized economic significance, signaling to the international community that competence and rule of law adherence matter not only on the battlefield but in boardrooms and central banks alike. In this context, short-term headlines, explosions, destroyed tanks, territorial gains, mask the more consequential reality, economic attrition, leverage, and global interdependence. Pokrovsk is not merely a tactical victory, it is a demonstration of how disciplined strategy translates into both immediate and long-term pressure on an adversary's economy. The strike is a reminder that modern conflicts are as much about the flow of resources as the flow of bullets. The law of economics, like the law of armed conflict, punishes incompetence with ruthless efficiency. The strike at Pokrovsk is not an isolated event. It is a prism through which we can examine the evolving architecture of global power. Conventional narratives fixate on immediate gains or losses, territorial shifts, destroyed equipment, casualty counts, but such metrics are superficial. The deeper consequence lies in how this event recalibrates the strategic calculations of nations, alliances, and markets over the coming decade. Ukraine's ability to impose operational and economic pressure signals a shift in power perception. Competence, precision, and adherence to international norms increasingly define influence, whereas brute force alone erodes legitimacy. For Russia, the loss is both material and symbolic. Beyond destroyed assets, there is the strategic cost of diminished credibility. Allies reassess reliability. Adversaries reassess vulnerability. When military failures coincide with economic mismanagement, the resulting vacuum invites realignment. Nations that once relied on Russian energy, arms, or political backing are compelled to hedge bets, diversify sources, and rethink commitments. The ripple effect extends from European capitals to Asia, where long-term trade and security partnerships are being renegotiated, not on the basis of ideology, but on measurable capacity to deliver outcomes. This is also a lesson in the law of accountability. States that operate under rule of law principles maintain strategic resilience. Predictable, measured, and legally grounded action fosters trust, while political improvisation breeds instability. Ukraine's conduct, constrained by international law and deliberate planning, contrasts starkly with Russian improvisation, where opaque decision-making compounds battlefield losses. This contrast shapes global perception in ways that cannot be undone by propaganda or temporary tactical successes. Influence once lost is difficult to reclaim. Markets remember, diplomats remember, adversaries remember. From a long-term perspective, the strike exposes a key reality. Modern conflicts are multidimensional. They are simultaneously military, economic, and reputational. Short-term headlines, destroyed vehicles, dramatic explosions, political rhetoric capture attention, but strategic historians will focus on capacity, resilience, and adherence to systemic norms. Ukraine's ability to convert tactical victories into structural advantage underscores a principle often overlooked. Sustainable power derives less from raw force than from competent execution under constraints. Finally, Pokrovsk highlights the fragility of assumptions about invincibility. States that appear dominant on paper can falter when political chaos meets operational failure. The global community, often slow to reconcile perception with reality, is now witnessing a recalibration in real time. The long-term lesson is clear: competence and accountability, not propaganda or intimidation, will define the next era of international order. The events in Pokrovsk illuminate a principle that is often obscured in wartime rhetoric. Leadership matters. Not simply the figureheads or political slogans, but the capacity of those at the top to enforce accountability, make coherent decisions, and reconcile short-term exigencies with long-term strategy. Ukraine's leadership demonstrates a disciplined alignment of military, legal, and economic instruments. Russia, by contrast, reveals a troubling pattern. Centralized authority, untempered by accountability, produces predictable failure, and failure, in turn, amplifies chaos. Political incompetence is not abstract. It has cascading consequences. Poor decision-making at the apex of power generates operational errors, erodes institutional competence, and signals to allies and adversaries alike that commitments are unreliable. In Russia's case, repeated battlefield setbacks, exemplified by the losses at Pokrovsk, highlight a structural inability to synchronize strategy with execution. Bureaucratic opacity and the suppression of dissent ensure that mistakes are neither acknowledged nor corrected. The result is a feedback loop of miscalculation, eroding not only military capability but political legitimacy. Ukraine's counterexample underscores the value of transparent accountability. Decisions are public, structures are observable, and failures are addressed systematically. This may seem a minor advantage amid the immediacy of conflict, but in practice it multiplies strategic options. Allies gain confidence. Adversaries calculate risk more conservatively. Leadership competence converts tactical success into durable geopolitical leverage. By contrast, leadership that avoids responsibility fosters systemic fragility, turning temporary setbacks into existential threats. The political consequences extend beyond the battlefield. Domestic audiences in authoritarian regimes often bear the brunt of strategic mismanagement, facing economic hardship, propaganda distortion, and limited recourse. International observers adjust their policies accordingly, imposing sanctions, curtailing cooperation, and recalibrating defense strategies. Leadership failure is not contained. It projects outward, reshaping alliances, influencing markets, and altering perceptions of global stability. In short, Pokrovsk is a case study in accountability, or the lack thereof. It demonstrates that the capacity to lead under law and principle matters as much as tactical prowess. States that fail in this regard invite systemic instability. Those that succeed consolidate influence far beyond the battlefield. History will remember not just the losses or gains, but the quality of decisions that shape them. The lesson is stark. In the intersection of law, power, and geopolitics, leadership is the multiplier that separates durable success from catastrophic collapse. The strike at Pokrovsk is a fulcrum upon which broader geopolitical currents pivot. It forces a confrontation with realities that are often obscured by media spectacle and political posturing. Russia's losses, while tactical in nature, carry implications that extend into strategic, economic, and legal domains. Observers and policymakers alike must strip away the noise and ask what endures beyond the headlines: the capacity to act with discipline, the resilience of institutions, and the credibility of leadership. These are the currencies that define the next decade of global order. We should anticipate continued pressure on Russian military and economic structures. Disruption of logistics, energy exports, and command networks will not vanish overnight. Recovery will be incremental, costly, and politically fraught. Ukraine's strategy, by contrast, emphasizes sustained leverage rather than short-term theatrics. This asymmetric advantage will shape the decisions of regional powers and global institutions, compelling recalibrations of alliances, trade dependencies, and defense postures. States that underestimate operational competence risk misjudging long-term stability. Global consequences extend further. Markets already sensitive to geopolitical uncertainty will increasingly price in the systemic weaknesses exposed by Pokrovsk. Investment decisions, energy contracts, and financial flows are all contingent on perceptions of reliability. Countries that display internal coherence, adherence to law, and strategic clarity will attract confidence. Those mired in chaos will face penalties far exceeding battlefield losses. The world is watching which states can convert capability into trust and which cannot. Accountability remains central. Political and military leaders who ignore failures or manipulate information create vulnerabilities that propagate beyond their borders. Conversely, disciplined leadership transforms operational gains into durable influence, demonstrating that law, principle, and competence are not abstractions, but strategic assets. The next phase of international competition will favor those who integrate ethical restraint with effective action, a stark contrast to brute force divorced from accountability. In conclusion, Pokrovsk is more than a military event. It is a lens through which we see the interplay of law, power, and consequence. Tactical success without strategic discipline is ephemeral. Operational failure in a complex, interconnected world has lasting repercussions. Realistic prediction is not optimistic projection. It is sober acknowledgement that competence, accountability, and adherence to law determine which states endure, which falter, and which shape the future. The lesson is clear. The world rewards clarity and punishes chaos. Pokrovsk is proof in miniature that in geopolitics as in law, there are no second chances for the incompetent.